Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Tennessee Disability Coalition Disability Day on the Hill Legislative Webinar, version 1. Let's get started here in a minute, but let's make sure that our interpreter, Melissa, has the accesses she needs.
I cannot get my camera to go on.
Uh-oh. Are you blocked?
Yeah.
Let me make you co-host. See if that helps.
There we go.
Wonderful. Okay, we've got our permissions. We've got our interpreter. It is now 1 o'clock. We will give it one more minute to let folks grab their sandwiches, have a seat, and dig into what's going on with Disability Day on the Hill 2025. All right, that's 1 minute. So my name is Jeff Strand. I'm the Director of Public Policy for the Tennessee Disability Coalition. I'm a white male. I have some dark graying hair on the sides here. I've let my beard grow far too long for the purposes of legislative advocacy. Got a little gray here in the bottom, and I've got a blue sweater on, and I'm standing in my office, which has entirely bare walls. So we're going to do a little housekeeping first over here. So if you would like captions, there's a way to do this down on the bottom of your screen. If you go to the closed caption section, it might happen to be in the little more 3 dots part of this. But oops, I'm sorry. You are seeing something different than I am, but there's a closed captioning. You press that little up arrow. Some might call it a caret. And you can add closed captioning and subtitles. So once you've selected those, you can access the full transcript or change subtitle settings. If you've got questions on that, please feel free to put them in the chat, the webinar chat. I'll try to keep an eye on it and see if I can help you out. You can see our wonderful interpreter, Melissa, over here pinned to the screen. If you would like to pin them to your screen, if you hover over her window, she's got 3 little dots up in the corner. And if you click on that, you can see that drop-down menu in the image there. It says chat, pin, request camera control. Pin is what you want. So that will keep Melissa right at the top of your screen so you can follow along using ASL. Here's what we got going on today. Disability Day on the Hill is my favorite day every year. Over the past, let's say, is this the 3rd year back, I believe, where we're doing it in person? We've seen hundreds of people with disabilities and their families in the state of Tennessee come on down to Cordell Hall, the legislative office building, come on over to the Capitol and make their voices heard. And it is so vitally important that Disability Day on the Hill creates this impact, because what we do here at the Tennessee Disability Coalition, among many other wonderful and important things, is to do good public policy on behalf of the Tennessee disability community. We don't want to do that public policy to you. We want to do it on your behalf. And when y'all come down to Disability Day on the Hill, when you participate in the webinars, when you're sending stuff to your legislators, if you're participating virtually, you are giving us that permission to speak on your behalf. And we are powerful when we speak on your behalf, because the disability community in Tennessee is huge. It's like 1 in 3 people. And it's got to be one of the biggest groups of folks with a special interest like ours, disability, in creating a good state for disability services, supports, everything we need to live our lives. That's how we get these things done. So today, I'm hoping to equip you with a couple tools, give you a little bit of the lay of the land about what is going on at the Tennessee General Assembly this year and how you can make your impact. So I'm going to back up here. I'm a former special ed teacher. I'm a former history undergrad, so I love some good civics, right? So we're going to back up just a little bit, make sure we're all on the same page about civics. I'm going to give you all the lingo that you can use. You can pop into legislative offices and drop terms like roll to the heel and taken off notice, and they will be blown away. Then we're going to get into the 2025 General Assembly session. We are about 2 months in, maybe a little under 2 months in, month and a half in. And there's some stuff that you should know. So I'm going to make sure you know all those things. I'm going to get all the way to Civics 103 with this one and talk about what we're seeing in the state of Tennessee and how it works, what's happened so far in our session. This is always an important one because we do a lot of our legislating based on this, but how are the vibes? What are the vibes like? What's it feel like to be down there? What are our legislators sensing and feeling? And what can that tell us about crystal ball predictions? So we're going to look at what we think is going to happen. Then we're going to talk about bills that you might be interested in that impact the disability community, talk about what you can expect at Disability Day on the Hill 2025, talk about some opportunities to make the most of your advocacy, some strategies, some things to consider. And then I'm going to leave you with a couple resources, and then we'll try to have time for questioning. I'm going to set my clock right over here so I ensure that I leave us some time for questions, because if I'm allowed to just ramble on, I will ramble on indefinitely, and we won't have any time. So got my clock going right here, and let's get started. Civics 101, state versus federal. So what you can see here is one of my favorite diagrams of all time. This is a Venn diagram. So on the left side, you can see national, federal government powers. On the right side, you see state government powers and how they overlap. This is the basis of U.S. federalism. And federalism stems from the federal government, which has its own special authorities and trickles down all the way to state government powers. And so there, as you can see here, there are a few overlaps, but in many cases, especially when it comes to disability policy, the feds tell us what to do generally, and the state applies that in the way that they choose. For example, the state says you can have a disability waiver program through the Medicaid program for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And then Tennessee says, okay, here's how we'll do it. And if the federal government says that's cool, they give us some money, we match that money, and we implement at the state level. So most of our authorities, most of the things we do stem from powers given to the state by the federal government, as long as we follow their rules and it is implemented in a way that Tennessee chooses, right? So I'm not going to go through this whole list here, but I wanted to show this diagram just to sort of explain a little bit of background about why things are the way they are. Some of it's federal, a lot of it's Tennessee. Okay, so I've got 4 little quadrants right here. And so distinguishing the difference between state and federal can help keep you on track at Disability Day on the Hill. And I'll explain why in a minute. So at the state level, these are the type of things that are happening. You might have heard about the debate about universal school vouchers. That happened during the special session this year. That is a state issue, right? TDC bills, I'm not going up to DC, I'm just going downtown. So when we talk about paid family caregiving, when we talk about 10-care network reporting reform, we're talking about state level stuff, and we do that down at the Capitol in Nashville. The state budget, as it might seem, is a state thing, right? We get some money from the feds, but it is up to the General Assembly to establish a state budget, which includes the ability to tax our residents and to spend that money. And then there are 1,400 bills so far this year in the General Assembly. Those are all state level. They're not asking DC to do anything. They're not asking Oklahoma to do anything. Those are things that will apply to Tennessee and Tennessee exclusively. So when you're thinking about headed down to DDH and you're riding in your car like I do, and you're practicing your little spiel, your shtick, your speech, right? It's best to keep those at state level issues. So if you've got an issue with 10-care or the Department of Disability and Aging, if you've got an issue with the services being provided you, with the provider network, with unruly support personnel, that's a state issue. That's something that is a good thing to talk about at DDH because it is a state level issue, and our state level folks, or our legislators work at the state level. If you've got a concern about housing, Housing can be a state level issue. And especially if it's very specific to where you live, that's a state level issue. Employment, if you are trying to get a job, trying to get a better job, trying to leave your job, that's a state level issue. And it's something they can work on at the state level. DSP wages, that's a state level issue. At the federal level, and I'm sure you've heard about this because it's all over the news all the time, everywhere. Budget reconciliation, that's what the folks at Congress up in DC are doing, determining what the budget's going to look like going forward and utilizing that budget reconciliation process as a tool to implement policy change. That's complicated. You don't need to know about that. That's not a Disability Day on the Hill thing. And I'm not sure I could explain it to you, to be honest. You might have heard of DOGE. DOGE is doing some cuts up there. That's a federal thing. Closing federal agencies and department, federal thing. The Texas versus Becerra, the 504 lawsuit that's going on right now, that's at the Supreme Court. That's a federal thing. When you sit down with, say, good friend, Representative Michael Hale at Cordell Hall in Nashville, he's not going to be able to help you out with budget reconciliation. So when you're talking to him, potential Medicaid cuts, Michael Hale can't do anything about that. Foreign affairs, the Supreme Court, the executive orders, those are all federal things. And they're things that you can discuss, but I'll talk about the right way to discuss those in the future. But when we say DDH 2025, the most effective use of your time and your advocacy is on state level issues. So I've got some advice. I spent some time down there. I talked to these people. I know a little bit about them, or at least I think I do. So if possible, focus on that state level stuff. That's stuff that they can help with, and that's stuff that they're motivated to help with because we elect them. Tennesseans elect them, right? And so they want to serve Tennesseans. You don't have to be a policy expert to talk about them, though. You don't have to know all the details. You barely have to be able to explain what each bill does that you're talking about. You don't even need to talk about a bill, right? You are an expert in your story, and that's what matters, particularly if you're talking to your own senator or representative. It's important to them that they have a relationship with you, the voter who put them into place, and to understand where you're coming from. So if you're talking about paid family caregiving, tell your story and explain why it's important in the context of your story. That is how you really make change. And that's why I can't do it alone. That's all you all. And that's why DDH is so important. If it's impossible to focus only on state level stuff, my sincere recommendation is to tread lightly around that federal stuff. It's all about context, right? So it's not saying that I want President Trump to do this, or I want Congress to do that, or I want the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid or the Department of Education to do that. It's how you fit into the context of what you're talking about. How does your story be impacted by that? And it's best to keep that on your story and generically related to the thing at the federal level you're talking about. So it's not, hey, Representative Brock Martin, please don't cut Medicaid, because he's not doing it. It's explaining to him, Medicaid is important to me and my family because this is what it looks like in Tennessee. This is what it looks like for me. And just ensuring that they understand that it's important. You don't always have to ask them to do something. It's just, should they get the opportunity to do something, which they might, you want them to think about you and how it's going to impact you, how it's going to impact your family. The Department of Education is important to my child because, right? You don't have to ask them to go up to DC and chain themselves to the door so they can't go in there. You explain, if they get the chance, please think of us. Please think of our needs. Please think of why this is important to us, the voters who put you in to maintain, right? It's more educational. It's not intended to persuade. It's intended to tell them why it's important. And this is going to sound like an insult. It is not meant to be an insult, only sometimes, but not this time. We have a citizen legislature in Tennessee. All these folks are not professional legislators. They only spend about 4 months up here really thinking about policy and legislation. Then they go home and operate their funeral homes or their ranches or their lawyers or stuff like that. So they are not experts in this stuff, right? They need you to educate. And that's why sometimes education on its own is persuasive rather than trying to sell them an idea or get them to do something. Just informing them so they understand when they see it that there's some context around this and they'll think of you. And like I said before, you don't need an ask. You don't always need an ask. Sometimes it really is just telling your story, telling them this is what special ed is, or this is what Medicaid is for me, for my family, right? You don't need to ask them to do anything. You can if you want, but you don't have to. And things to avoid altogether. We have a citizen legislature, and they can be sensitive beings, as we all can be at times. But things to avoid are, I'm just going to, stuff at the very top. The executive branch of the federal government is not a topic to discuss. I've come close to that discussion with folks, and it wouldn't have ended well if we would have continued the discussion. And it's not about politics. It's about partisanship. You want to make this as nonpartisan as possible. So it's not about Republicans and Democrats. It's about disability issues and disability issues only, right? Things to avoid: casting blame, casting poor intentions of the other person. It really is just about making them want to be on your side. And direct personal criticism usually is not going to get you there. 102, how it works. I got a little glossary for you here. A bill, and sorry if many of you I'm sure know this, but a bill is a proposed piece of legislation. The General Assembly, that's our legislature. They go to the Capitol, they go to Cordell Hall. We have a House and a Senate. We are bicameral, two camerals, and they have their own different chambers. The Speaker is the leader of the State House of Representatives, or the Senate, and the Senate should be. In the House of Representatives, that's Speaker Cameron Sexton. In the Senate, that's Speaker Randy McNally, who is also the Vice Governor. The sponsor, that's the person who is the legislator who is responsible for passing a bill. They present the bill, they do all the legal machinations in the background, and then when they go into committee, they present that bill, they talk about it, and it is their effort to try to pass the bill. Committees, those are a small group of legislators who work on different types of bills. So a very specific category, like there's the 10-Care subcommittee, and they hear all the things that go to 10-Care. There is the Senate Health and Welfare Committee. They hear all things related to health. They're not going to hear an education thing or a transportation thing, just health stuff. And here's some jargon, and this is where you really come in and show you're an expert. Calendar, as you can see, is a verb. To calendar is to set a date for a bill to be heard in a committee or the floor. To roll a bill is if a bill is calendared for 1 week and you roll it, it moves to the next week. To the heel, you're rolling it to the heel. That means that you're not changing the day, but you're changing the position within the committee calendar. It goes to the end of the discussion. A motion or a second, those are those parliamentary procedures that get things started. So what'll happen is a legislator will come up and they'll stand at the dais or the dais, excuse me, and say, I'm presenting this bill, and then they need two motions, right? A motion and a second to move on to the next step, which is when they get to talk. Calling the question means the discussion is over. You say, I want to call a question, we're going to vote on it. Other legislators can fight the call question. We need at least 3 people to say they don't want to call the question and keep the discussion going. A parliamentary inquiry is when you ask the clerk or the legal person in the committee, can you do this? Can you say this? Asking questions about the rules. To take something off notice is to sort of end the path forward for that. Putting on notice is to be calendared. Taking off notice is to say we're not going to go forward with this. And then the fiscal note. The fiscal note is an estimate by the Office of Fiscal Review, which is an independent little office down on the ground floor that estimates how much a bill would potentially cost the state if it were to pass. And those are wildly important. And I'll explain why in a little bit. An amendment, a proposed change to a bill, and a caption bill. We're getting a little past caption time, and because those normally show up at the beginning, but a caption bill, the bill that's introduced with the intention of changing the purpose later. A lot of times you'll see those and they'll be like, we're going to change the reporting date for the Agricultural Committee on soybeans from January 1st to January 15th. What that does is it gives permission for them to work on anything in the Tennessee code that falls under that section. And then they'll likely change the language later to do something else. We've used those before. Others use those. Sometimes you use it because you're not ready with the language and you need to get the bill filed. Sometimes you use it to hide the purpose of your bill. Civics 102, I'm going to run through this really fast because I'm looking at my clock. Actually, we're doing pretty good here. Here's how it works in Tennessee, in my experience. And this is one of my favorite parts about working for the Disability Coalition in this policy space, is every bill that we've ever run has come from the community. As long as I've been here anyway, it comes from the community. They have this idea or they have this problem that they want help solving, or they think they have this idea that can solve an existing problem. I'll run through these with an example. Last year, we passed a Medicaid buy-in program. We got a call from former Representative Darren Jernigan, who had met this guy in Amarabi, who had this really good idea about getting back to work after a car accident, but he needed his Medicaid. So there's such a program that existed in 47 other states called the Medicaid buy-in program, where you pay a little premium, a little bit of your income, and you can get access to Medicaid regardless of your assets or income. So we went to go find sponsors, right? So Robbie came with me, and we ended up asking Representative Tim Hicks to be that sponsor. And then another self-advocate working on the same issue, Bliss, came with us to ask Senator Watson. They said, I agree, sponsor. So we had to draft the bill and file it. So we have to write it in bill form, which can be confusing, but you don't need it, right? You as an advocate don't need it, but it really is the details of the bill and where it falls in the Tennessee code. That's how we make sure that we have legal authority to implement these things. It's got to fit in the code, right? And once you've got it right, you're going to file it. Once it's filed, it'll be introduced. There are 3 instances when it's introduced. It's introduced first and then put on the calendar. It is passed on first consideration and then it's passed on second consideration. And essentially, that's, you know, a procedural hurdle. They almost never get stopped right there, but it's the first thing that happens. Then you get a committee assignment from the speaker. That's Cameron Sexton on the House, Randy McNally on the Senate side, and they will assign it to the relevant committee. For Medicaid buy-in, it was assigned to the health subcommittee where it started because it's a health-related issue, right? And so each committee will then vote to pass it along to the next committee or pass it along to the House or the Senate floor, okay? You can change the bill as you go along, and often that happens. We've had one bill that we're waiting on right now that just had its 4th amendment to it as we negotiate with TennCare on working on this. Sometimes it changes it entirely, like if it's a caption bill, like we talked about. Sometimes it tweaks the details, like we're doing right now. Once you've made it through all your committees, including finance, they've got to say that they're going to pass it and get it through finance. It goes to the House and Senate floor, where there'll be the big vote with the entire body. Everybody in the House votes on it. Everybody in the Senate votes on it. If they vote to pass it, there is something that can happen. If the House and the Senate had different versions of it because of different amendments through the committee process, they negotiate the differences or align the 2 bills. And once it's all good, everybody agrees it's passed both the House and Senate floor in the same fashion. It goes to the governor's desk, who can sign it, veto it, or leave it sit on his desk for 10 days and it automatically becomes a bill. Once it becomes a bill, the Secretary of State assigns it a public chapter, which is a number that assigns it into the Tennessee Code, and then it goes into the Tennessee Code. Sometimes a bill will say that a certain department, such as TennCare, can promulgate rules. Not always, just sometimes, and only if the bill says so, to set up the details of this. So like in a Medicaid buy-in bill, we might need details about eligibility. We didn't, but you know, if you haven't explicitly said so in the bill, you're authorizing TennCare to make those rules in the background, in the rules and regulations part. That's how a bill becomes a law. All right, what's it like right now? So this is year 1 of the 114th Tennessee General Assembly. There are 2 years in every session, and they have very different vibes, for lack of a better term. So year 1, they come in, they pat each other on the back, they talk about rules, they agree on the rules, then they go home for 2 weeks. They're called the organizational weeks. Sometimes they go home, other times the unlucky ones have to move their office. And so they have to pack up all their stuff and bring it to the new place. Then they come back and pat themselves on the back a little bit more because they're not ready to go because they just spent 2 weeks being off. Then you usually get the governor's State of the State address, his budget proposal, and then they slowly get into things. And now we're kind of past that slow part. Year 2 goes way faster, right? There's no organizational time. There's no new rules. No, there's a lot of patting themselves on the back, but in a different way. And it goes a lot faster. It usually has upwards of 3,000 bills proposed because you can propose new bills in the second session or second year of the session too. But this is year one. So we're just kind of getting in the groove right now. There are new rules. So like I said, they get together at the beginning and agree on their rules. There is a 12 bill limit this year. Last year and years previous, each House member could have 15 bills. Senators, unlimited bills. On the House, 15 bills. This year, 12 bills. Next year, 10 bills. And that is really proving itself to be an obstacle to advocates because you need somebody to sponsor. And if there are limited bill slots, you got to get in there early or you got to be real persuasive. There remains the golden ticket. Golden ticket's how you sit up in the gallery in the House gallery and when they go to the House floor and they have House session. So you need to find a legislator to give you a golden ticket so you can get up there and sit. I believe you can request them from the website these days. And then this is an interesting one this year. It has been nicknamed the dissent dungeon. So if the speaker, Cameron Sexton, decides that someone is too unruly or breaking the rules too often, they send them over to the legislative lounge. They can only participate via Zoom. Haven't seen anybody go to the dissent dungeon yet, but like I said, we're just getting started. There are new committees that happen every 2 years. Sometimes they shake them up, sometimes they don't. This time they shook them up. My favorite new committee is the TennCare Subcommittee, chaired by good friend Michael Hale. And that means that we now have a committee where all of our issues with TennCare are funneled through, right? And that gives us a really good foundation from which to start because we can explain on our terms. It's also, hopefully, and I haven't seen it yet, but this is more of a year two thing, like an avenue for recourse where we can bring in folks to talk about their experience with TennCare in front of people who make decisions about TennCare. There were some shakeups in the education committees. It used to be K-12 sub, education administration, education instruction, and now there are 2 subcommittees and just one big committee, chaired mostly by the same folks. But in the health side, they shook up the health committees pretty hard. It's like a turnover of maybe half the members. David Hawk, Representative David Hawk, is no longer the chair of the health subcommittee. And so whenever we've had conversations in the past, we're going to need to start over with the health committees. The budget. We used to have tons of money. We used to have surpluses in the multiple billions of dollars range. Last year was the first year that we didn't, and this year we're on track for a small deficit. Not big, in the grand scheme of things, but we're less than 1% under, in the red in our revenue collection so far this year. What this really means for us, though, is there won't be lavish spending. It just makes the end of the session, when it goes through the finance process, all the more difficult because it is now a smaller pie from which to eat. We heard the state of the state earlier this month from Governor Bill Lee, and he laid out some of his administrative priorities. We already had the special session that had universal school vouchers, that had some immigration stuff, and that had Hurricane Helene relief for East Tennessee. All of those bills passed. All of the governor's priority administration bills passed. And so now we've moved on from those, except you might see some folks try to work on it, likely unsuccessfully, however. He is suggesting we inject $1 billion into the Tennessee Department of Transportation, TDOT, to fix roads and bridges. This is one of the first instances when I've been in this position where I've seen them use so extensively the bond process, which is essentially the state borrowing money. And the state, if you've heard it before, is very proud of its fiscal conservatism and its balanced budgets. And they're about to use $1 billion in bonds that will unbalance the budget. There's some childcare reform, which I think is welcome. And there's some housing funding that's going on, new starter home loan program, and then fully funding, I think this is an interesting one, the Rural and Workforce Housing Tax Credit, which incentivizes developers to build low-income housing. There's other stuff. We'll try to get into the other stuff, and I'll give you some of the other stuff, but I see I'm under 15 minutes here, so I'm going to keep going. Here's my vibe chart. I tried to make a vibe chart. I don't know if this works, but I'll really tell you, it's been a roller coaster. And that is abnormal for the session. So the beginning of session, everybody's happy. Started, hope springs eternal. We're all going to make Tennessee a better place to live. And then we immediately started with a special session. Everybody got grouchy about it because there's a high pressure, well-funded campaign to get legislators to vote for universal school vouchers, where it failed last year and had nearly failed when it was implemented in the first place. I think that was 5 years ago, and now there's a federal trial about that. The state of the state and that this kind of navigating bill limits kind of made everybody grumpy and grouchy, and it wasn't a whole lot of fun. But then we got to bill filing deadline, and everybody's like, well, I got what I got. Let's get started. We're going to get going here. And then we had President's Day and some snow, and all the senators went home, which made it really difficult to get things started. So then it kind of dragged to a slow, a slow nexus right there. But as we look into the future here, you can see DDH 2025 is always a high point for me because it is so influential. And so as you can kind of tell from my little diagram here, it feels like it's starting to level out a bit. And that's really kind of getting in the groove where committees are ready to go, bills are starting to fly hot and fast. And there is more opportunity to see the change being made rather than wait for it. The Senate has declared that they will end on or before April 17th. I've heard this before, but I believe at this time, that federal trial I'm referring to has subpoenaed quite a few members of the Tennessee General Assembly to testify in it. And they want to wrap up their business before they have to head out to the district or federal court to be part of this. So overarching kind of vibes about this, the supermajority, it's a Republican supermajority, is very confident, both given their performance in the state level stuff or state level voting last year, as well as what happened at the federal level, right? Where it's a unified Republican government in DC. And so they're really pushing for a lot of their priorities, and they're a little bit less tolerant of dissent this year. They feel as though they have a mandate to implement their agenda, and they're doing so. And so when challenged, they feel as though they have this authority to push forward with their agenda. And they do. They're the supermajority, but it's the tolerance of dissent that can be sort of scary sometimes. All right, TDC stuff. I'm going to have to speed up the process here. So we've put a lot of stuff out there. If you go to our website, we've got these kind of described in there. If you sign up for my legislative policy updates on Fridays, or if you come check our website on Monday, you can see me describe these in great detail. So I'll just run through them really quick. But the big picture is this year we're picking on TennCare, and that's because their programs and their services are inaccessible to many, many Tennesseans with disabilities for whom they've promised stuff and are not following through. And it is quite upsetting to me, and I'm happy to yell about it this year. So access is really the focus this year. So the first one has been described to me, and you've probably heard me at this point because I say it ad nauseum, as unsexy. It might be unsexy, but it is impactful. This is the TennCare Network Reporting Reform Act. It doesn't change necessarily. I kind of miswrote this here, but it adds on to how TennCare has to report its network adequacy, or how many doctors, specialists, therapists, providers they have available for people enrolled in the TennCare programs to access, right? The way that we're adding these things are percent service utilization. What do you promised versus what do you get when it comes to services? Average appointment wait time, which is sort of self-explanatory, and average time between approval for and start of a service, right? So if they say you're approved for 20 hours of ABA therapy a week and you don't start it for 18 months, that is going to be reflected now in the data rather than saying you're approved, it's good. So I'm excited about that one. That one is going first. It is up next week in both the House and Senate. Excuse me. Freedom for Family Care Act, AKA Paid Family Caregiving, Part 1. This is just knocking down all the barriers. So we worked on this pretty substantially last year, work on it substantially again in the coming years. But this removes barriers to being hired by a provider agency to provide paid services to a loved one. TennCare says they already do this. That's great. Put it in the code, right? And it also prohibits discrimination based on a number of things, including familial status, your relationship to the person, where you live, how old the person you're providing care is to, some stuff about conservatorship status. So it just tries to make sure that we all understand what's going on with this. And the last thing they have to do is provide a guidance document that lets provider agencies know that they can hire a family member to provide care to a loved one and exactly how, so that they're confident in doing so. And then the last one has not moved yet at all, but it's Katie Beckett Part A HRA. And Part B of Katie Beckett, there are essentially two parts. Part B is able to use the wraparound funds using an HRA. In Part A, they have to go through their Medicaid provider or their Medicaid insurer, so like Blue Cross Blue Shield or something, which is way, way, way harder, which makes it inefficient and ineffective. So we want to fix that to make it look more like Part B. Other stuff to consider this year. So this is an incomplete list. I'm sorry, but I'm still like 600 bills behind in seeing what's been submitted this year. It's been a busy one. Temporary Medicaid expansion, that offers, I think it's 18 months of coverage for people earning up to 138% of the federal poverty level. It is an attempt to get the door open on Medicaid expansion. It's not all the way there, but it's a start, and that's maybe where we need to begin. Family leave for serious health conditions. This allows state employees to take up to 6 weeks of paid time off, not from their own PTO, but for family leave to support a loved one with a serious health condition. To me, this seems like a no-brainer. We'll see. Copay accumulators, this one is complicated. I wrote about it last time, but essentially, a drug manufacturer offers a rebate or financial assistance to allow consumers to access their very expensive drugs. Typically, those savings are intended to go to the consumer, but insurance companies have figured out that if they don't count that financial assistance towards the deductible, they're able to extract more funds from the consumer. So they get to keep the savings rather than go to the consumer. We'll see if that one goes. That was a huge fight last year. Emma's bill is a really good one. This is the second year it's come through. It is expensive, but worthwhile, in my opinion. This requires TennCare to consider someone's entire condition when making choices about changing the amount or extent or type of services that are available to them. So in this case, Emma was a college student who developed a viral disease that entirely incapacitated her. And at one point, the doctors wanted to attempt to wean her off the ventilator. And because they were doing that, they reduced a ton of her other services, not considering that she is just getting off a ventilator and is in a comatose state, right? So they reduced services because they attempted to improve her condition, and that's sort of backwards. And pharmacy benefit manager guidelines. This is making sure that pharmacy benefit managers are acting in a responsible way and not trying to extract funds or savings in a similar way to insurance companies. Bad ones. I'm not going to belabor these. And you can see that I only put 2 on here because mostly I want you to talk about the good stuff. It's always better. But there's a big one coming out of the General Assembly this year, which I've deemed the Plyler-Doe challenge. Plyler is a Supreme Court decision that says school districts have to serve undocumented students. For us, that's a little aside our lane, right? But what our lane is in this is that IDEA, the special education law, has a clause called child find, which says that every school district, no matter what, has to go out and affirmatively look for kids who might have a disability, evaluate them for the disability, and if they do have a disability, provide them service through the school district. We are concerned, and that clause says explicitly to include migrant children. So we are concerned that if they pass this law and attempt to implement it, and they take it up to the Supreme Court, which is their stated intention, that this will contradict IDEA and mess up child find, which has impacts for all of us. Retirement of charges for individuals deemed incompetent to stand trial. Last year, they passed a bill called Jillian's Law. This is meant to address some of the unintended side effects of this, but in a really unproductive way. So Jillian's Law says that if you are deemed mentally incompetent to stand trial because of a mental disease or defect is what they call it, or intellectual disability, you can be incarcerated indefinitely until you've either regained competency and you can stand charges or face your charges in trial, or they find a set of mandated outpatient treatment options available to you. And we know there are not a lot of those options out there. So you could be in there for a long time. Turns out, it takes a while to evaluate folks. So there's a big backup of folks waiting to be evaluated for their competency, meaning that they're not really able to apply Jillian's Law in the way that they wanted to. So currently, if you're deemed mentally incompetent and incarcerated because of it, your charges go away after a year. Because the evaluation process is taking more than a year, that they're going to get rid of that and say, whenever we get to you, we can still charge you or move you out for your mandated outpatient treatment, which is just not really a way to address what are real concerns about Jillian's Law. So DDH, what to expect? Bad news for you. It has been busy at Cordell Hall. There have been so many days on the Hill, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday this year. It is difficult to park sometimes. But what is most concerning probably to our community is it fills up the hallway, which makes for some tight squeezes and loud spaces and a long time waiting for the elevator. I'm sorry to say there's little we can do about that. I'm expecting our Disability Day on the Hill to coincide with some other large days on the Hill. So just planning out your time and just sort of mentally preparing yourself for the circus. Making your meetings, I'd start now. Start calling and asking. Mention that it's Disability Day on the Hill. And if you are, oh my goodness, my timer went off. I got to speed this up. And if you're a constituent, they're more likely to schedule a good meeting. You don't have to stop at your own legislators. You can see our sponsors there. Representative Hale, Lynn are two of our sponsors. Senators Massey, Roberts, and Ackberry are our other sponsors. You can stop in and tell them they've done a great job. You can also focus in on bills that you're interested in and go speak to their sponsors or people in a committee for whom they'll see that bill. And again, this is one we can't really control, but your meeting time will be at the discretion of the office, right? If you said, I want a 9 a.m. meeting on Disability Day on the Hill, they might come back and say, well, how's 2:30? And that's just how it goes. But if you start now, you're more likely to get your ideal time. Committee hearings, this one is fun. I'm excited about this. The Freedom for Family Care Act, aka Paid Family Caregiving Part 1, will be heard on Disability Day on the Hill in Senate Health and Welfare. That means that anybody who's interested in going to see how that works can come in and see one of our TDC priority bills in action. We've got maybe some signs for you or some opportunities to demonstrate the support for this bill. So I'd encourage everybody to take time at 1 o'clock on Disability Day on the Hill and come in and see Senate Health and Welfare. That said, there's a whole slate of committee hearings. If you're more interested in education, you head over to the Education Administration Committee on the Senate side. If you like agriculture, the Ag Committee is meeting on Wednesday. So you can pick out committee hearings. They're interesting to watch sometimes. And just kind of see how it works. We'll have materials and resources for you as well. Those will be in the second floor comptroller suite, which is where we will have our home base. All right. Oh, shoot. I have not put Carrie in charge here. All right. See if that works. Come on. There's Carrie. Hopefully that worked. Carrie, how's that?
Yes, thank you. I think I'm on now. Yes, thank you, Jeff. Very good. All great information. So my name is Carrie Carlson, and I get the pleasure of working with Jeff at the coalition. I know we're running out of time, so very quickly, I'm a middle-aged white woman. I have a blue shirt on, and I have a blue background behind me. But I have been working closely with the Family Voices team, and we've been doing some family and community engagement work around Disability Day on the Hill. So going over some things, I know Jeff, you hit on some of this, so I will briefly go over. But number one, if you want weekly updates, if you want Jeff's awesome 2-minute policy videos that go over these bills, get out your cell phone and text the word teamwork. That's TEAMWORK to 72690. And I wish I had a prize for anybody that could tell me what date this is, but I don't. So just think about it. But and we're also having advocacy workshops. So this Thursday, we're having another workshop and we're going to go over how to tell your story, right? For your meetings. What are the important things you need to know? How much time do you have? Kind of telling you how to make that elevator pitch, just really going over how to tell your story, how to stay away from those big federal things Jeff talked about and bring it back to the state level stuff, right? And like you said, scheduling your meetings, right? And even if you cannot come to Disability Day on the Hill, your legislators, your elected officials still want to hear from you. So you can schedule a meeting close to your hometown when they're not in session. You can do it over the phone and you can do it via Zoom, right? So if you can't come to Nashville, go ahead and schedule those meetings anyways. And that helps you to start building that relationship with your legislator. Jeff talked about the 10 bills, right? Telling your story and building that relationship with your legislator right now could give your legislator time to bring that idea to a bill maybe next year, right? If that is something that that they see and that you see is right. So start building that relationship. Attend local meetings, right? City council meetings, those mayor meetings that we all have. And vote, right? If you're not registered, get registered. A lot of the legislators, right? They're busy, as we know. We just heard from Jeff, right? They're gonna see their constituents, not saying they won't see you if you're not voting and you're not registered, but you know, they want your vote. So make sure that you're registered to vote. If you can't vote for some reason, then you know, obviously that's something else, but get registered and vote. And I think I hit everything. Thank you.
Thank you, Carrie. Sorry,
Yes,
I didn't
thank
leave you
you.
much time.
That's okay.
Couple other things we're working on, run through these really quick. Housing is a big issue in the disability community, as it is everywhere, but it is especially important to our community because sometimes we have different requirements of our housing. We, in our scorecard this year, found that there are 0 counties in the state where a person with or a family with a disability can earn the median income and buy the median price home. 0 of them. So it's time to work on that. So I would encourage you to bust out your phone right now and get that QR code and fill out the survey. We are working with the good folks at the Kelsey, which is an inclusive, disability-specific community, or a community that specifically serves people with disabilities in an integrated community-based setting, who's coming into Tennessee to work on these housing needs with us. They're partnering with the Department of Disability and Aging. They're partnering with us, and they're looking for your input. There will be other opportunities to participate with them. We're looking at a focus group, hopefully later in the month, later next month, to really hear about what the needs are so they can help DDA develop a plan to meet them. Regulatory rule changes, we're trying to work with behind the scenes on rules and regulations at the state level around ECF choices and Katie Beckett. Special education stuff, we are eagerly awaiting a report from the Office of Research and Educational Accountability in the Comptroller's Office to publish their study that we requested on informal exclusionary discipline practices in special education. So sending kids out when you should. And we're working with the State Board of Education on teacher preparation reform. But these are a little bit slower than working at the General Assembly, but worthwhile nonetheless. There are more than one way to, I can't think of the metaphor, bake a piece of bread. Resources, tndisability.org. You can see our policy priorities. We'll have links to the bill web pages up there and the video shortly. At DDH, we'll have a QR code with all of our Disability Day on the Hill resources available to you in the comptroller suite, so that you can carry it around on your phone and be well informed when you're speaking to your folks. We've got our DDH workshops where we'll have a couple opportunities to build leave behinds and participate with some of your other fellow advocates in advocacy. Carrie already got teamwork, sign up for the policy updates. And then we haven't said this one yet. One more thing on Disability Day on the Hill. DDH 2025, my favorite day of the year, second favorite day of the year is Disability Advocacy Day, which this year happens to fall on the day before Disability Day on the Hill, Tuesday, March 11th. We will be celebrating alongside our community party at Fat Bottom Brewing in the Nation. So come on through, find an opportunity to chat with us. Very informal, kids welcome. It's all good. Questions? I left. What did I leave? 10 minutes. So I will open up the Q&A right here and see if there's anything I can try to answer. Becky is looking for the link for the advocacy workshop. I might try to defer that one to Carrie so that we can try to get you to that.
Jeff, it's Carrie. I just put all those links in the chat for people.
Beautiful. Thank you, Carrie. So not in the Q&A, it's in the webinar chat, folks. I'll just kind of hold on for questions. Carrie, if you want to sing a song, you could, like the Jeopardy song or something.
You want people to stay on, right, Jeff?
Yes, fair enough. Fair enough. Well, I'll hang on here for 9 more minutes, but if y'all have to go, because you know it is middle of the day on a Thursday, totally understand. I want to thank you for joining us on our TDC Disability Day on the Hill 2025 legislative webinar. I hope it was helpful. If you do have questions, please feel free to drop in the Q&A, or you can send me an email, jeff_s@tndisability.org. That's Jeff with a J, the normal way, not the G way, JEFF_S@tndisability.org. And I'll happily try to answer any other questions or hear you out on any other issues. Please note it's a busy time of the year down at the General Assembly, so it might take a minute, but I'll get back to you. I see we've got a hand raised here. I'm going to open up permission to talk here. Autism TN, if you've got a question or a comment, yeah, I believe you can speak now.
Okay, it's Amy.
Hi, Amy.
So I don't really I didn't really know how to change my name. I'm sorry about that.
Oh, good.
Okay, I think Autism Tennessee was just following what happened with SNAP benefits earlier this week. And I just didn't know if you could even just educate on what ended up happening, and if you are knowledgeable. And because we were following that work from the Tennessee Justice Center, so not from the TDC. But what actually happened, and maybe the impact and what's next.
Sure. Yeah. So SNAP is Supplementary Nutrition Assistance Program. It is commonly known as food stamps, but more formally known as SNAP. SNAP is available to low-income folks to help them buy groceries, right? It's not a ton of money, somewhere between $60 and maybe $120 a month, depending on your income level and your household size. And there are a lot of restrictions to it. You can't buy hot food. You can't buy a lot of things. And it has come under fire from the federal side of things. So this is another one, if you're going to talk about it at the General Assembly, talk about what it means to you. You don't need an ask on this. But as Congress in DC goes through the budget reconciliation process, where they kind of lay out how they want to implement their policies. Budget reconciliation is a tool that allows a large, often very large bill to move through both the House and the Senate in DC and avoid the filibuster. The filibuster is an opportunity for a minority party to hold out and refuse to vote on something. To overcome the filibuster, you need 60 votes. In the Senate, Republicans only have 53. So in order to pass really anything of any controversy or disagreement, you need to be able to use the budget reconciliation process. Last week, the House came out with their initial budget reconciliation proposal, right? It's not quite a bill, it's budget reconciliation, but it acts a lot like a bill. And in that reconciliation recommendation, which they will from here on out negotiate within the House and the Senate, this is just kind of their first draft of it, are pretty steep cuts to SNAP. And it is unclear exactly how those will be implemented. That's part of what they have to work on. Similarly, they've proposed $800 billion in cuts to Medicaid, but we don't know how. We don't know what they are yet. It is just this outline of money only about how they're going to cut that. So SNAP is probably pretty straightforward. They'll probably eliminate some eligibility categories, right? Medicaid is another one. Because the Medicaid is, more complicated than SNAP. So what'll happen next is they will negotiate on the final details of budget reconciliation. So they've got the outline, they've got the first draft, they say they want to cut SNAP and they want to cut Medicaid. Next up is them determining how and in what form that will look like. And they'll have to negotiate with their folks. There are some Republicans who have said that entitlements or benefits such as SNAP are off limits to them. And then there are what you would call fiscal hawks, who are all about cutting funds and understand that it'll cause pain, but their primary goal is to cut the budget. And so they will have to negotiate within their Republican majority in the House. The Senate will do the same. Then they'll have to negotiate with each other. Then they'll have to vote to pass it in the House. Then they'll have to vote to pass it in the Senate. Then they'll have to send it to President Trump's desk to sign. So there's still a lot to learn about what this is going to look like. But it is likely that in some way, shape, or form, there will be cuts to SNAP and Medicaid. We can't tell you what they'll look like yet, but that is unfortunately the case. Did that help?
Yes.
Okay. Martez, good to see you, Martez, or good to see your text, Martez. The Precious Cargo Act, if I understand that one correctly, that was one that passed the Tennessee General Assembly a couple years ago, that allows or creates a database of folks who submit their information about this, to mention that there is someone who might be riding along with you, or you are that person who has some sort of difficulty that might make an interaction with a police officer difficult, whether that be a communication issue or some other issue. And that allows a police officer who might pull someone over to, prepare themselves or to utilize other resources to address whatever they were planning to address. Housing Focus Group, we are still finalizing the details about that. We'll send out some information in the future here. That's going to be hosted by the folks at the Kelsey. It'll be virtual. They are looking at hopefully March 16th, 17th, or 18th, but we haven't finalized that yet. We will make sure that people have an opportunity to participate because that's really important, because one of the things that they really want to do in their kind of analysis of the Tennessee housing landscape, disability housing landscape, and their suggestions for moving forward is to ensure that those are rooted in the experiences of people with disabilities looking for housing in this state. So I'm sorry I don't have more details on that, but I will get them out to our folks as soon as we can. We are 1 minute from 2 o'clock. If anybody has any more questions, I'll try to squeeze one in. Again, thanks folks for coming in to hear us out on Disability Day on the Hill 2025. I hope to see you at Disability Advocacy Day at Fat Bottom Brewing on the 11th and down at Cordell Hall on the 12th. If you see me walking around, I have my eggplant purple suit that I wear around. If you see me, please come on up and say hello. Tell me about what you're working on. I'll tell anybody and everybody, I love talking about this stuff. I love talking about this stuff with our community. So please, if you see me, come on and tell me what's up. Tell me, usually I have a pin on my lapel that gets turned upside down. Help me out with that. But again, thanks for joining us today. Hope to see you in 2 weeks. And let's make a difference here in Tennessee. And if there are no other questions or comments, I'm going to go ahead and close this out. Thanks again, everybody. We will see you soon.